All right. Well, happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to PatristiCast. This is episode 14 of Scholars Forum. I'm your host, John Solheid, here in Toronto, Canada. Very delighted to welcome today Dr. Guy Stroumsa, who is Martin Buber Professor Emeritus of Comparative Religion at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, as well as Professor Emeritus of the Study of the Abrahamic Religions at the University of Oxford. He has published very many books and articles, notably Barbarian Philosophy, The Religious Revolution of Early Christianity, 1999, The Making of the Abrahamic Religions in Late Antiquity, 2017, Religion as Intellectual Challenge in the Long 20th Century, selected essays, forthcoming very soon. And the author of the two books we're going to be talking about today, The Scriptural Universe of Ancient Christianity, 2016, and The Crucible of Religion in Late Antiquity, forthcoming 2021. So, Dr. Stroumsa, welcome to PatristiCast. It's very delighted to have you.
I'm very delighted to be with you.
So, I figure maybe we'll start with the Scriptural Universe of Ancient Christianity. This book intersects so much with my own scholarly interests in the reading culture of ancient Christianity, and in particular, Origin of Alexandria. But I want to start with a quote, actually a couple of quotes, and then that'll help us dig right in to the book. Quote, "Late antiquity saw a revolution in literate culture, the consequences of which would be no less dramatic than that of the invention of the movable type in early modernity." And then you go on, you extend this a little bit further in a very provocative claim. And I actually kind of agree. And you say, "More than to any other single factor, the conversion of the Roman world, religious conversion of the Roman world, may be traced to the Codex." Now, there are a couple of things that perhaps out of these quotes we can spend some time on here, which I think are worthy of our attention. One is the revolution in literate culture. And here you take some time to talk about something that's gained a lot of scholarly attention over the last 30, 40 years, is the move from the book roll to the Codex and how significant that shift is. And then the other one, well, let's not deal with the other one yet. Let's focus on the book roll and the Codex, and then we'll get a little bit deeper in. So can you talk a little bit about that shift and what its impact had on this religious revolution in late antiquity?
Well, thank you, John. I'm very happy to be with you. I think I speak in the introduction, and you quoted the first sentence of this introduction. I speak about a double paradigm shift. And let me tell you a bit what I mean by that. The book is called The Scriptural Universe of Early Christianity. Actually, I wanted to call it The Scriptural Galaxy of Ancient Christianity. The publisher convinced me, they asked me, why do you want to speak of galaxy? And I said, because I refer to McLuhan, to the Toronto scholar of McLuhan, is speaking about the galaxy of the book, starting with, starting with Gutenberg. And my editor at Harvard University Press smiled and said, well, young people don't identify anymore the name of McLuhan. So that was an elegant way to tell me that I'm getting old. So universe. But what did I mean by that? I meant that early Christianity, I'm trying to understand the connection of two shifts, paradigm shifts, very different. One, a technical one in religion, a technical one in culture, I'm sorry, and the other one in religion. And it is the combination of these two shifts that creates this universe that will eventually lead to the idea of a cultura Christiana in the later Late Antiquity, from Augustine on, if you want, the idea of, and then the Middle Ages. So the first is a technical discovery, a discovery which starts not among Christians but among pagans, of the Codex. What is a Codex? A Codex is what we call a book, pages bound on one side, and you turn the pages and you write on both sides of the book, of the parchment, of the papyrus, of whatever support you have. You write on both sides. A, it's twice as cheap as writing on one side. B, it became very convenient. It's much, much more convenient for inter-references. You want to quote a verse, to go back to a verse, you don't have to roll the scroll on the other side until you get to the passage. You turn pages.
So can I just interject here? So a book roll would be something that you unfold, right? Either this way or this way.
Yeah.
And a codex is something that you can just open up and flip the pages.
Sure.
And so you can imagine someone like Origen or Augustine, using those little post-it dog ears that we have today to save if they wanted to look up a passage, they can look it up right quick.
Yeah, exactly.
In there, and then they can look it up. Whereas the book roll, you just can't do that.
Yeah, I must say that many of these people, you mentioned Origen and Augustine, many of these people usually did not have to look back to the verse as we do. I mean, they knew their Bible very well. I mean, they didn't know the verse, but they knew the chapter. They could quote by heart. And altogether, if I may put a parenthesis here, the memory,
yes,
was memoria in Augustine's Latin, is something very different from what it is for us. I'm not going to elaborate here, but let me just say, I'm 73 years old. I grew up in a suburb of Paris. I went to school in the 1950s, and we memorized poetry, French poetry. We memorized French poetry from the 17th century, from the classical period of La Fontaine, the fables, and so on. We memorized a lot. I've forgotten them now. I feel sorry and a bit guilty, but I've forgotten them now. But at the time, we did not only memorize the multiplication table, but also lots of texts. I remember at the end of my first grade, I was an early reader. I loved to read. We had a book of history. And I remember there were 20 pages. We were first grade, yes? There were 20 pages, one for each century.
Yeah.
More or less. I mean, starting with Rome and Christ, ending up with de Gaulle's liberation from the Germans.
Yeah.
That was, and I think I knew, so, and each page had, half the page was a picture
Hmm.
and half the page was a short text
Mhm.
in bold characters.
Mhm.
But I knew the book by heart.
Mhm.
You would tell me the page or you would show me the picture and I would be able to tell you, to say it by heart. I mean, that's, so in antiquity, people had a lot more in their memory. First text, the Psalms. I mean, for Jews or Christians, of course. First text, the Psalms. I still know people growing up in a very religious family or atmosphere who can recite the whole book of Psalms in Hebrew by heart.
Mhm.
You tell them the number of the chapter and they will, and they know it by heart. I can't do that, but that still exists. And certainly I see my daughters who are now in their 40s were good students in good schools in Israel.
Mhm.
They knew much less Bible than their mother, who went to the same school and sometimes had the same teachers.
Yeah.
So in the generation of my daughters and your generation, probably things have changed dramatically everywhere.
Yep.
Everywhere in the Western world, I don't, but I guess that in China too. I mean,
Well,
so
you bring
so
up.
in the I wrap up here. In the ancient world, the passage from roll to codex, yes, it makes things much simpler.
Mhm.
It and much cheaper. It is also, although it is possible to have a very small roll, it is, we know more of small codexes,
Mhm.
codices. And I should add that the invention of the codex is not a Christian invention,
Mhm.
but the Christians picked it up much faster than anyone else. Much more, we see the graph of the development of the codex among Christians from the from the first to the fourth century, and it's exponential.
That's right.
In pagan society, it's much less so.
Mhm.
And the Jews who had already in the first century a traditional religion
Mhm.
keep their tradition. They use only the scroll for the Torah,
Yeah.
and so on. So Christianity as a new religion is able to pick up new technologies much faster than anyone else, and certainly as a persecuted religion.
Yeah, I can't remember now if it's William Johnson or perhaps Larry Hurtado. They compared the Christian preference for the Codex with the pagan, the Greco-Roman preference for the roll, and they suggest, I think it's William Johnson, but now I'm forgetting. They suggest that the Christians weren't so concerned with the aesthetics, whereas if you were a Roman citizen, an elite like Pliny, for example, Pliny the Younger, the material aspect of the book roll is something that kind of conveys somebody's status. It's something that's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing. So if they showed their friends, it's like somebody today on Park Avenue showing their art collection to their clientele or something.
Yeah.
Whereas Christians, they didn't really have that concern. It was more utilitarian almost.
Exactly, and they are not. They were usually not. They did not belong to the richest strata of society, and they are they are free. They have no traditions of their own, like the Jews. The Jews cannot move to a new support because that's how things are done.
Yeah.
Think of, evangelical Christians, not only in America, in Asia, in Africa, or radical Muslim movements. The use in 20, 30 years ago, I noticed that the use of the cassette, of the audio cassette, and then of the video cassette was immediately picked up by the more radical and new and marginal trends in religion.
Mm-hmm.
They smell something, a new technology that can help them.
Yeah.
Traditional hierarchical communities or societies don't pick it up that fast.
Yeah. Well, this kind of gets into the second thing that I was going to talk about at the very beginning, and then I kind of held it off, is this question: why did anybody become a Christian in late antiquity? And so you link the conversion of the Roman Empire with the shift from the roll to the Codex, which I think is an important insight, because what we see over time, certainly by the 3rd century, you have somebody like Origen who's summoned really to the mother of the emperor. I forget which Severus it was, whose mother, Julia Mamaea, for a theological discussion. So by the middle of the 3rd century, certainly elites in society are starting to gain an interest in Christianity. And John Kloppenborg, who I had on here, who is the first guest I had on here actually, whose work ties in nicely with yours, asked this question, and he posits two kind of complementary reasons why people became Christian. One is this transformation of literary culture. So intellectuals, elites start to gain an interest in Christianity as their literacy improves and stuff. But then the other one is for the average individual who's not an intellectual or an elite, the Christian group gave a sense of belonging and connectivity in society. Mm-hmm. Your book certainly ties into the first observation that there is something within the Christian culture of the book that starts to attract people. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that, because you kind of get at that in your book a little bit, about how the shift in technology of the book actually changed reading practices.
Yeah, it's not Christianity develops from, it starts with Jewish communities. Mm-hmm. Paul's letters are read to synagogues. It starts with Jewish communities in cities. It is a phenomenon, a religious phenomenon of cities in the Roman Empire. As you know as well as I do, Paganus is a peasant. The new ideas do not arrive as fast to the hinterland. New ideas are passed on by travelers, usually in around the Mediterranean. They travel by boat and they go from port to port, so from city to city. They preach, even when they start preaching beyond the synagogue, it's mainly in the city. So early Christians are inhabitants of cities in the Roman world, and more know to read than in the hinterland of the provinces. Mm-hmm. And so books are something that travels. Books travel, and people like them, and they have new ideas. Mm-hmm. Books present new ideas. Mm-hmm. It's not that there are no, of course there are books in the Greco-Roman world. But the books, culture is not religious. The books and religion are something different. There are some hagioi logoi, but religion is mainly I'm speaking in very rough terms here. Greco-Roman religious phenomena are rituals plus myths. The myths can be written, but they are usually told. Mythos is something that is spoken. Stories about the gods or whatever, stories that which are connected in some ways to the rituals that you practice. The religion is what you do, and the rituals interpret it. They say, we do this kind of sacrifice because Heracles or Hercules did that or that. I'm not going to go into that more, but with the Christians, it starts, and it's with the Jews, of course, it starts with a book. Here is a book that tells a story, the story of a people or the story of a man. A man so special that if you want to call him a god, you may call him a god. But it's a story, it's a mythos if you want. It's not a mythos because it is a continuation of a historical book. The Torah is the books of the Jews for a non-Jew, for a Roman, for a Greco-Roman. The books of the Jews are two things: A book of history, B, a book of laws. Prophecy belongs to history, if you want. So you have the Torah, the Pentateuch, which are laws, what you should do, and laws for a Greek or a Greco-Roman or a Roman. Law is not religion.
Yes.
Law is legal, the things you do, you must do, and what you must not give up to. And so you have laws and you have history. History is straightforward. And then, so the New Testament, but the New Testament are all these books. I mean, the books of the Christians do not only bring the New Testament, they bring the Bible, the Greek Bible, the Bible, and the final story of our Lord, of Jesus Christ, which is the some, of course, but it's only part. It's maybe the most beautiful or the highest part, but it's only part. And this is a religion. So the religion of the Jews, and then the religion of the Christians, which is like the religion of the Jews, but simpler, more open, more appealing, no circumcision, for instance, and so on, and easier to, and an idea.
Yes.
There's only one God, which is not something that is unknown in the Greco-Roman world. Of course it is known, but it is appreciated by philosophers. So the highest level of cultured society, they are not necessarily the richest people, but they are very dignified. And so, and they basically think there is one God that is above all other gods. So this idea is a respectable idea. Is a respectable idea.
Plato and Aristotle were certainly monotheists.
In that, of course, yes, yeah.
And this, okay, so this raises one of the underlying themes of your book is this move from ritual sacrifice to a more discursive form of religion. And so a question that emerges then, okay, so in the Greco-Roman civic religions, as you say, it's rituals, it's sacrifice, these rituals have meaning, but it's not really rooted in texts. Whereas Judaism, of course, has the book, the Torah, the stories, and but then in 70 CE, there's the destruction of the temple. And so we start to get rabbinic Judaism. That must have had a very profound impact on the life, the thought, the practices of Judaism, which filtered into Christianity, because the temple was the place of the sacrifices, but the synagogues really valued the Torah, the reading and the study of the Torah instead. So it becomes a little bit more discursive. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's a very significant phenomenon in late antique religion.
Mhm. Look, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, we know now that there were also other Jewish temples, but they're almost erased from cultural memory and religious memory of the Jews. But basically, there's one temple, and there was a temple in Egypt, and there's one temple, there's one ritual, which is daily sacrifices done by the priests, like pagan priests. And Julian the Apostate, Emperor Julian, who dies in 361, writes in his book against the Galileans, so against the Christians, he says, actually, the Jews and us, we have the same religion, except for one thing: we believe in many gods and they believe only in one God, but otherwise it's the same kind of religion. We have sacrifices and so on. The Christians, they are not, or the Galileans for him, they are not quite religious. They gave up on what constitutes the core of religion, which is blood sacrifices in the temple. Now, the Jews, the synagogue replaces the temple in 70. It's of course more complicated than that. There were synagogues before, and the Jews didn't completely give up on the idea of a temple. Julian permits them to rebuild their temple, and they get very excited. They want to rebuild the temple, and a miracle happens, and there is an earthquake in Jerusalem, and the work for the work for the rebuilding had started, and it collapses, and then Julian is killed in battle against the Persians. And so Chrysostom said, Christ has given us the final victory over the Jews and the pagans at once. But basically, you're right, the synagogue and the church replace the temple for Jews and Christians. And I want to call your attention to the fact that the synagogue and the church, in a synagogue and in a church, the ritual is done inside and not outside. In the Greco-Roman world, in the whole Mediterranean, you take somebody from England or from Gallia. You bring him or her overnight to Ephesus or to Alexandria to watch, and you ask him or her to watch a ritual in a temple of a religion he doesn't know. And you ask him, what is that? And he will say, this is religion. This is a foreign religion, a religion I don't know, but anybody in the world, in the Mediterranean world and in the Near East, sees a sacrifice, knows this is religion. If you enter a synagogue or a church, you don't see a sacrifice, although the Christians call it a sacrifice, and the Jews in their prayers mention the sacrifice. This is not a sacrifice. You see a book in a church or in a synagogue, you raise a book, a codex or a scroll, and you say, this is the word of the living God.
Mm-hmm.
This never happens in a pagan ritual. And so the ritual is a ritual around a book, and it is a ritual of a small community inside a building. It can be a big church or a big synagogue. In Alexandria, people say, I think it's Philo who describes how people raise flags in order to tell the public to stand up or to sit down, because it was big. But it's inside. It's inside. There are no mics, and so people must hear what the priest is reading, or what the priest is commenting upon. Commentary. So here you have the text, the written text that is being shown. It is being read, so it's being heard. It is being read, heard, seen, and then it is being interpreted. So you interpret that. What does it mean that Jesus enters Jerusalem and he was, the gospel says, Jesus enters Jerusalem and he was teaching. It doesn't say what Jesus was teaching. You know, for the church, a teaching is a doctrine. In the early church, like in the synagogue, like in a yeshiva today of Orthodox Jews, teaching means studying the Torah. You read the text and you comment upon it. So what I want to say is that these are a religion of the book, like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, is a religion of orality also, of a very complex dialectics between the written text and the oral comment. A commentary can be written. Origen tells his commentaries, he has scribes in Alexandria who write it down, and then it is being read by further generations. But there is always a very complex ballet, if you want, a very complex dance between the orality and the written text. And this is what I mean when I say the scriptural universe.
Yes.
It's a universe that includes as much orality as writings. Yeah. I'm sorry, your turn now.
No, that's wonderful. A few things that I was thinking of in this conversation. One is the complementarity that Christoph Marxius brings in between implicit theology, so the theology that underpins ritual and the prayers, for example, or things like baptism, Eucharist, stuff like that. And then explicit theology, which is the discursive kind of theology that is the interpretation. So it's a scholar like Origen, Augustine, Chrysostom, explaining the meaning of the biblical text at a theological level for others. So this starts to emerge, this complementarity. You say in your book, you're very careful in your book to say that the bookishness does not necessarily replace ritual. Ritual still happens, but there's a different dynamic at play between the two of them. And this, of course, influences Christian education, Christian paideia. So it creates what you call, if I'm understanding your use of this term correctly, the divine palimpsest. So on the one hand, you have the Bible as we would know it, the canon of the scriptures, overlaid with commentaries and homilies and other theological reflections upon it, hagiography and stuff like that. That kind of fits into this scriptural galaxy. Am I getting you correctly there?
Totally. It's very complicated. I mean, explicit and implicit theology is certainly true in all religions.
Mm-hmm.
Rituals are implicit theology everywhere.
Yes.
Explicit theology, texts of doctrine written by church fathers or medieval scholastics, is explicit theology. But again, the balance between explicit and implicit is never always the same. It's not the same in different religions. In Judaism, there is theology. It's not a religion without theology.
Mm-hmm.
But orthopraxy is much more important than orthodoxy.
Mm.
So doing the right, it's not that there is no, if you believe in 3 gods or in 4 gods or in 5 gods, you may not be a very good Jew for the rabbis.
Yeah.
But most people, you don't speak about that. You speak about what did God order us to do.
Mm-hmm.
So implicit and explicit works very clearly for early Christianity and for patristics, less well for rabbinic Judaism, for it exists, but in different terms.
Sure.
I say that the book, religion of the book, does not replace religion of the cult.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Jan Assmann, by the way, Christoph Marxis is also a very close friend of mine. My friend, the German Egyptologist Jan Assmann, speaks about the passage from Kult Religion to Buch Religion, cult religion to book religion. And I criticize him here. There, I think that it's misleading, because when you have a book religion, you didn't give up on cult.
Mm-hmm.
Just cult integrates the book into the cult. Mm-hmm. About palimpsest, what do I mean? Again, this is memory. Mm. We started by mentioning memory in the ancient world and in ancient cultures. A palimpsest is a text that has been written on another text that was erased, right? And in many ways, this is what you have. Christianity is, again, to use a concept used by Jan Assmann, a secondary religion, whereas the religion of Israel is a primary religion. This is not really true, because the religion of Israel is also a secondary religion in comparison to the religion of Canaan. I mean, you do something different from what was done before you. So palimpsest is that you never completely erase what was written before, and you have a text, you have a new text that hides an earlier text and hides earlier traditions, but they can be reconstituted. You may need ultraviolet, or you may need X-rays or whatever, and carbon 22, but you can go back and find what there was before. So the study of religion, in many ways, even when you deal with texts, is an archaeology, in the sense of Michel Foucault, archaeology of knowledge. Yeah. We're doing archaeology of religion.
No, I think the metaphor of a palimpsest, I think, is quite fitting, because at this time, as you know, the writing materials were rather rare. So oftentimes they'd have to erase or somehow kind of wash out a previous text and then write over it. Mm-hmm. And we see this, for example, in a fragment of Origen's Hexapla, which I think is preserved in Cairo, which is a palimpsest. So you could tell that somebody erased, but not all of it, the fragment of the Hexapla. And I think on top of it is a Jewish text. I think it's in Hebrew. I don't know what it is exactly, if it's a rabbinical text or not. So the metaphor of a palimpsest is actually quite fitting for the period that we're talking about here. And I think it kind of highlights what's going on, because in the fragment of the hexapla, you can reconstruct it, even though it's been written over. So it's still there, you know.
Sure. And if you mention the hexapla, let me try to describe to you what happens in 3rd century Caesarea. Origen doesn't know Hebrew, but he knows Greek. He grew up in Greece. He grew up in Alexandria. He met Jews in Alexandria already. He met Jews. We don't know exactly what kind of Jews. Some of them may have been Christianized Jews. We don't know for sure. But they taught him things about the Bible. He comes to Caesarea, where there is which is a big center of rabbinic scholarship. And the rabbis write, they speak Aramaic, they write Aramaic or Hebrew, but they manage in Greek, maybe not Homeric Greek and not Platonic Greek, but neither does Origen. They manage in Greek. Pardon?
New Testament Greek, the Koine Greek.
Yes. Yeah, a bit more, because he got some good education in Egypt, if not directly from Plotinus, his contemporary, but he met in Alexandria people, Mesoplatonists. He met Platonists, and he learned from them, and he met Gnostics. He met Gnostics, Platonist Gnostics.
Okay.
So Origen and the rabbis, they manage in Greek, in Koine Greek, and Origen knows that the rabbis know their Bible very well. And he knows that they have a tradition of commentaries. The rabbis, I don't think, are very interested in Origen's commentaries on the Bible. But so he comes to them and he asks them. And Origen is our first witness to the idea of Jewish mysticism. In the introduction to his commentary on the Song of Songs, Origen is our first written witness telling us how the Song of Songs is the core of the Jewish mystical tradition, which appears in Jewish sources only much later, but it was the case already in the 3rd century, as we know from Origen. So this is a very complex world where you have the philosophers, the Christians, the Jews, the Gnostics. After the second half of the 3rd century, also the Manichaeans, who think that they are the best Christians and the only true Christians. And of course, all the general culture all around, where people are neither Christians, nor Jews, nor Gnostics, nor philosophers. But sometimes they read some poetry or some tragedy, or usually more and more very low comedies. Just like our television in our days, it gets lower by the week, I think, everywhere. And so that's what was happening in late antiquity, and Jews and Christians and philosophers and Gnostics know that they are marginal communities and intellectually and religiously higher than most people on the marketplace. So what I want to insist that A scriptural galaxy is within a tradition. You have the texts, the commentaries, the oral, the memory, the oral commentaries, the ritual. I did not say it until now, but it's very important. The translations.
Yes.
I mean, the Septuagint, then a number of languages start with translations of the New Testament. This is true for Gothic. The languages existed, but they were not written until then. This is true for Gothic. This is true for Coptic. This is true for Syriac, Aramaic, Christian Aramaic. This is true for Armenian. And this is so it's extremely important. So you have a connection between religion and culture, and you have a connection between the scriptural traditions of different religions and cultures. So this is why it is a universe or a galaxy. I preferred galaxy because galaxy is something always moving. It's not, if you think of universe, you think of a fixed, although we know that the universe is constantly moving. So that's what I was intending to say when I gave the name to this book collection of forays into an extreme something much more complex than what I could do in a limited number of pages.
Yeah, and you get at this in some of the later chapters, and we could talk a little bit about it if you would like. There were a couple other things I wanted to ask you about, points of debate perhaps. But in your later chapters, you talk about the convergence of Eastern and Western religions. So it's not just the Mediterranean world, but you talk about the influence of the Far East, what we would call the Oriental traditions of, Hinduism, Buddhism, this and that, Mani in what's modern day Iran. Very fascinating conversation. And that kind of fits in with this galaxy that you're talking about. But I wanted to talk a little bit about paideia, so education, and how these early Christians grappled with the educational canon, so to speak, because as you say, it's really the classics, the Homeric epics that provided the literature to teach students grammar and language and writing. Early Christians really struggled with this because some of the stories were quite scandalous. And so then you kind of get into this. Here's where you really highlight the role of monasticism in shaping Christian literate culture. And you seem, on the one hand, to say that at one point in the book, you say that they completely rejected the canon. On another point, you say that they didn't really. It's more complicated. So I wanted to flesh that out a little bit more.
Sure.
For example, you use like Evagrius and Antony as models for more of an anti-intellectual strand of Christianity. But then you cite Sam Rubinson quite positively, and I think I agree. I really enjoy Rubinson's work on Antony, that there's a philosophical rigor that often gets kind of ignored in monasticism. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. That was something that stuck out to me.
Okay, sure. I agree. I also agree with
Rubinson.
With Rubinson, yes. I agree with him. It's convincing. His book is convincing in presenting the philosophical education of Anthony as an educated intellectual. Quite clear. That's fine. I may not have been careful enough, but what I mean is that within Egyptian monasticism, most of the monks are not educated.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the monks don't know Greek, they know Coptic. I mean, I'm thinking especially of of the later tradition Coptic of Coptic monasticism. There were huge monasteries. It seems that at some point early on there were some Gnostics. They are educated and they have a higher education, but later on it's there are fewer and fewer people who can even read Greek. And for them, now, Evagrius is something different. Yeah. Evagrius works in Greek, goes to monasteries where there is a tradition of origenist monks who are extremely sophisticated intellectually, philosophically, and develop a Christian mysticism. Mm-hmm. Wait. Okay. So we have a Christian mysticism that grows within the monasteries in Syria, in Asia Minor, and in Palestine, in the monasteries of Palestine also, not in the monasteries of Egypt, which are much bigger and not far from the Nilus, because you can never be very far from the Nilus. It's something else. If you jump a few hundred years, go to Byzantium, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that will be true throughout the history of the Byzantine Empire until 1453, the fall of Constantinople, and later on to these days in Greece to some extent. You go to Byzantium and you see two parallel systems of paideia, of education. The old paideia, which is the Greco-Roman paideia, you start reading with Homer, and everybody is Christian at some point, and it's a problem. It remains a problem because Homer tells stories that are not proper for the ears of 5-year-old boys. By the way, it is almost always boys and never girls, very rarely girls. But so you invent, either there is some censorship, or you give interpretation, hermeneutics. But this kind of metaphorical hermeneutics of the Homeric epos is something that was known already by the pagans. It starts in the 5th century. So the old tradition of hermeneutics through allegory is something that the Christians continue. It starts actually. Philo applies the old pagan hermeneutics, which he had learned from the philosophers, to the Bible, and then the Christians continue. And Philo, as you know, was known as the first Christian father.
That's right.
The first father of the church, and it's not by chance. He is, the texts of Philo are kept and transmitted by the Christians and not by the Jews. Right. After the 2nd century, the Jews basically forget. They don't quite forget Greek because they can still communicate in Greek, but they forget Greek culture. They move to an Aramaic cultural world, which is very different and much more oral. That's something else. So until the end of Byzantium, paideia for the educated strata of society is a paideia, which is a continuation of the Greek paideia, the Hellenistic paideia.
Yeah.
Parallel to that, you have the monks who want to nurture the next generation of monks. So they have churches. They have schools near their churches in the monastery for poor boys, gifted boys from poor families who otherwise would not get an education. They get scholarships. They study, and they study not with Homer, but with the New Testament.
That's right. Yeah.
So you have until the end of Byzantium a twofold educational system, which exists in certain ways exists also in Israel to this day, and in different countries. You have two kinds of education: religious education and state education. Today, of course, in Western countries, they're not very different, but traditionally, this is where it starts. Oh, okay, that's what I wanted. You asked me also about Oriental wisdom.
Yes.
Let me say something about it. I think you must want us to finish very soon, but in the Greco-Roman world, I'm going to tell you the story of a book I wanted to write and never wrote, and became a chapter in this book. By the way, maybe that's true also of other chapters, but I once had the idea of writing a book about the idea of Eastern wisdom in late antiquity. And I thought I would write about Eastern, the wisdom of the Jews, the wisdom of the Persians, the wisdom of the Babylonians, and the wisdom of the Egyptians, and the wisdom of the Indians. I mean, these are the cultures which are known by pagans as well as by Christians in the Roman world, and Greek and Latin, mainly Greek. You have texts which describe Oriental wisdom, Eastern wisdom, and I thought it might be interesting to produce a map of these Eastern wisdoms as they are, as somebody like Porphyry, for instance, sees them. Porphyry, Plotinus's student in the 3rd century, late 3rd century, and Christian writers of the times until the 4th century. And I did not write this book. I started working on it. I didn't write it because I realized at some point that although the idea is interesting, I don't see how I will be able to write a book about it because it's very repetitive. They have an idea of an Oriental wisdom, but basically they think that it's always the same. That the wise men of the Jews, of the Indians, of the Assyrians or Babylonians, and of the Egyptians and of the Persians were basically philosophers. I mean, there were all these Oriental religions, but all peoples have a higher stratum of philosophers. And the philosophers all have the same teaching. They all, and which is our teaching, of course, which is Philo, and so I didn't find a way in which I could write a book in which all chapters would repeat the same thing, except changing Judaioi for Persians or Indians. So I put all I had to say in one chapter.
Well, this kind of gets, so yeah. Would you like to spend? We've kind of gone on for a little while. Would you like to spend a few minutes talking about the Crucible?
Yeah, okay, if you want. Yes, but not very long, but because it's a collection of articles. But you will introduce it. Yes.
So perhaps just one thing. Like you said, it's a collection of articles, but there's kind of an underlying theme, and it seems like it's really a sequel in some respects to your other books, like, or maybe not a sequel, but it's part of this larger project of what you're thinking on late antique religion. And you say that traditional scholarship has tended to focus on the shift from polytheistic religions to monotheistic religions. Mm-hmm. You say that, well, that's not necessarily incorrect, but you say something that's understudied and needs more attention is the tension between monotheism and dualism, which I think is a fascinating question because it's underpinning so much of the New Testament. You bring up this group, this kind of ambiguous group that we don't really know a lot about in terms of their group dynamics and who they were specifically, but the Docetists. You get their name, as you say, from the term dokesis, or like apparition or appearance. And like narratives of the resurrection in the New Testament, whether they're symbolic narratives that emerge in like the pre-passion narratives or the passion narrative itself, seem to be grappling with this tension, these debates between two different groups. Did Christ actually suffer on the cross, or was that an apparition? And you bring up this fascinating discussion of exegetical debates on the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22 as sort of some of the background of these debates. Can you talk a little bit about that? That was such a fascinating chapter.
Yes, I remember being exuberant while I was working at it. I thought I had grasped something. I thought I had found something that had not been seen in this light before. I remember I was very happy, and I sent it to a good journal, and they published it and immediately. And then I added, so it was called Christ Laughter, Docetic Origins Reconsidered. Christ Laughter because Yitzhak, Isaac, the name Isaac in Hebrew is Yitzhak. He will laugh.
I was going to ask you if that etymology was correct, because
yes, of course. I mean, this is the word. This is the word. Yitzhak, he will laugh, and so the Jewish tradition is always very conscious of this, and they interpret it and so on. I'm not going to present here my argument, which is technically complicated, but once I published this, Isaac is not sacrificed, basically, does not die at the last. That his father is willing to murder him is another scandal, but that we won't deal in with
another
that.
Paper.
Yeah, but I mean, there are libraries written on that up to Kierkegaard, of course. The Bible finds a way to say that at the last moment he's saved. He's replaced by an animal. animal sacrifice is permitted and human sacrifice is forbidden.
Mhm.
And in the ancient world, also in Rome and in Greece, the difference between culture or civilization and barbarism is human sacrifice. We good peoples don't do human sacrifices, although we've done that in the past, but we don't like to mention that, to remember that. It's a palimpsest. It's a palimpsest. And I think I could show how, for the earliest Christians who were Jews, what happens at the cross. I mean, it's a scandal, of course, scandalon, and what happens at the cross. Actually, he was replaced at the last minute, just as Isaac was replaced. And we have that through the Gnostic texts, some of the Gnostic texts, at least 4 texts from Nag Hammadi, Coptic texts. We have this Christ moves from the cross. Sometimes he leaves Jesus on the cross and he is divided, and the spiritual in him moves. So Christos moves to heaven, the heavenly Christ, and he sees the archons, the evil powers that think they have crucified him, and in fact they have not been able to grab him. They thought they grabbed him, but they grabbed Simon of Cyrene and so on, and they're happy to have killed him, and he from heavens laughs at them because he did one upmanship on them, if you want. Well, and again, this kind of laughter is not very Christian. It's not.
It's strange, yes.
It's a bit strange, yes. I mean, you don't have to be a good Christian to be a bit upset by this laughing savior.
The implication then is that Christ is up in the heavens laughing as his substitute on the cross is actually suffering and dying, which is
exactly. It's not very elegant. It's not very elegant either. But and then a student of mine who became then a colleague came to me and he said, I think I can continue your article. And we discussed that at length and so on. And then I said, well, we have to write this article together. And that's one of the 2 chapters in this book of mine that is co-authored with someone else. I mentioned, as soon as the book appears, of course, I will give him a copy. And I mention him. This second chapter is called The Greek and Jewish Origins of Docetism. And we show in this article how the same things happen in the Greek world. Iphigenia is also sacrificed by Agamemnon, his father, in order for the wind to blow and to bring the naves of the Greeks to Troy. But the Greeks had the same problems, and we see already in the 5th century how Plato knows that Stesichorus interprets the sacrifice of Iphigenia.
And this kind of reflects almost a natural human instinct in some regards. Dualism seems to be kind of present always and everywhere in some fashion, because it's not easy to make sense of the notion that Christ, if he is fully God and fully man, suffered on the cross. Does that mean God suffers? What's the relationship between the body and the soul, or between good and evilness and that? Which all these things emerge to create these interpretive debates as you kind of situate them, I think, as interpretive debates. And this is part of the cultural, religious revolution, so to speak, of late antiquity. I thought it was a very interesting discussion, both with Isaac, but also with the Greek tragedies where they use a substitute to suffer for the hero. I think it must reflect something that's natural to human beings to say, I don't want my hero to suffer fully, so somebody else has got to do it. I don't know. I was just thinking of that. It's not well thought out, but there must be something there. I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned interpretive debates. I will add polemics. And polemics, and I think that we might want to end our conversation with that, with Christianity, which, as we said an hour and so ago, is a religion where theology, doxa, orthodoxa, the right doctrine is important more than in other religions. There is a more developed tendency to argue about what is the right way of understanding the text. Mm-hmm. And more precisely, there is only one right way, which is mine. I'm the Orthodox. You don't agree with me. You are an heterodox or heretic. Mm-hmm. And in early Christianity, you have a division of the world of the religion between orthodoxy, my view of things, eventually the emperor's view of things in councils and so on, and supported by the bishops and interpreted by the bishops, and all the rest. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's Cyril of Alexandria, it's Nestorius, they're all vicious people. Sometimes you don't have to burn them, but you're not allowed to have dinner with them. So polemics, Christianity establishes a very complex system of polemics, intra-Christian polemics, polemics with the Jews. Actually, this is the first one. Mm-hmm. We know how to read the Bible and you don't know how to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. So polemics with the Jews, polemics within Christianity, polemics with the pagans. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at the end of our period, polemic with the worst of heresies, i.e. Islam. In John of Damascus's treatise against heresies, there are 100 heresies, and there is number 101, and this is Islam, the worst of them all. And it is a heresy because the Muslims see Christ as a prophet. Mm-hmm. But it is heretic because they are Docetics, because they say that Christ did not suffer on the cross. So the first heresy of the Jewish Gnostic Docetics and the last one of the Muslims is the same heresy. Within the 1,000, Irenaeus of Lyon speaks of heresies as a hydra with 1,000 heads. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course it's frightening. Heresies everywhere. You cut the heads and they keep popping up. But the first one and the last one are the same heresy. And it starts with, this is why Docetism is so important. It's the first one and it ends with Islam. And I think that here you have encapsulated the religious and cultural history of late antiquity and early Christianity. I think we might end here.
I think that's a perfect way to end. Dr. Stroumsa, thank you so much for joining PatristiCast. What a wonderful conversation.
It was my pleasure. Goodbye.
Go out and get yourself these books. They're necessary. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.